Have you ever been judged unfairly? Looked down upon for reasons you couldn't control? We've all faced moments of prejudice, but what happens when that prejudice is wielded by someone in a position of power? Someone whose job it is to serve you. This is the story of Zola Adebayo, a young woman whose first-class ticket was seen as a fantasy by a flight attendant, filled with contempt. But the flight attendant Brenda Jenkins made a critical mistake. She didn't just underestimate Zola. She failed to understand that some people don't just fly first class, they own the sky. Stick around to witness the most satisfying ice-cold karma you've ever seen, a lesson delivered not with words, but with the full runway-blocking power of a Gulfstream G700. The flagship lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 was an oasis of curated calm amidst the swirling chaos of transatlantic travel. The air, chilled to a precise temperature, smelled faintly of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso. Here the clatter of rolling suitcases was replaced by the gentle clinking of porcelain on saucer, and the hushed murmurs of people for whom flying was not an ordeal, but a routine. Zola Adebayo sat in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the ballet of aircraft on the tarmac below. She was dressed for a 14-hour flight to Dubai, a simple yet elegant black cashmere tracksuit from a designer so exclusive it bore no visible logo and a pair of pristine white sneakers. On her wrist, a Patek Philippe watch with a deep blue face caught the light, its complexity a quiet testament to her success. At 24, she possessed a stillness that was often mistaken for timidity. In reality, it was the deep, settled calm of a mind that had solved problems complex enough to earn her a fortune that would last 10 lifetimes. She had recently finalized the sale of her AI-driven logistics optimization software to a major shipping conglomerate. The price tag had 9 zeros. This trip wasn't for business. It was her first real vacation. Across from her sat Desmond Finch, her mentor and the first investor in her company. A man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and a suit tailored in Savile Row, he exuded an old-world gravitas. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a small smile playing on his lips. Nervous, he asked his voice a low rumble. Zola turned her gaze from the window. About the flight, none. About doing nothing for 2 weeks. Terrified. Desmond chuckled. The world will continue to spin, Zola. The algorithms will continue to run. You've earned this. Besides, he added, gesturing with his glass, flying on an Airbus A380 in one of those first-class suites is an experience in itself. A little prelude to the luxury you so richly deserve. The announcement for their flight, American Airlines 104 to Dubai, echoed softly through the lounge. "That's us," Desmond said, placing his glass down with a soft click. They gathered their carry-ons. Zola's a simple unbranded leather duffel, Desmond's a well-worn briefcase, and made their way towards the gate. The priority boarding lane was already forming a collection of seasoned travelers in business attire and wealthy families managing to look effortlessly put together. Zola and Desmond joined the line, their boarding passes ready on their phones. That's when Zola first saw her. She was a senior flight attendant positioned at the entrance to the jet bridge, assisting the gate agents. Her name tag read Brenda. She had a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair that looked as rigid as her posture. Her smile, directed at the passengers she deemed worthy, was bright but brittle. Her eyes, however, did the real talking. They scanned each passenger with the speed of a barcode reader, categorizing, judging, and sorting, when a well-dressed older man in a tailored suit presented his pass. Brenda's smile was effusive. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson. A pleasure to have you with us again. Your usual a Macallan 18 before takeoff." When a family with two boisterous children came through. The smile tightened a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, before being professionally masked. Then her gaze landed on Zola. It was just a glance, but it was heavy. It swept over Zola's tracksuit, her sneakers, her braided hair, and her youthful face. The professional smile vanished, replaced by a flat appraising line. Zola had seen that look 1,000 times before. It was the look that questioned her presence in advanced calculus classes in high school, the look that doubted her credentials in boardrooms, the look that said clear as day, "You don't belong here." Zola ignored it, her focus on moving forward. But as she and Desmond reached the front of the line, Brenda stepped forward, physically blocking their path to the gate agent. "First-class boarding passes, please," she said. Her voice clipped. Her eyes were fixed solely on Zola. Desmond presented his phone first. The agent scanned it. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Finch." Brenda didn't move. Zola held up her phone. The agent reached for the scanner, but Brenda put a hand out, stopping her. "Let me see," that Brenda said to Zola, her tone dripping with a saccharine condescension that set Zola's teeth on edge. Zola held her phone steady. Brenda leaned in, peering at the screen with an exaggerated squint. "Zola Adebayo, seat 2A, first class." She said the words slowly, as if they were in a foreign language she couldn't quite comprehend. She straightened up a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "Well, isn't that something?" She looked Zola up and down one more time, then turned to the gate agent, Laura, a younger woman who seemed intimidated by her senior colleague. "Laura, make sure you scan this one very carefully. We've been having some issues with fraudulent upgrades lately." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Several passengers behind them stirred, their curiosity piqued. Zola felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she met Brenda's gaze with a cool, unblinking stare. The storm had arrived, and it was wearing an American Airlines uniform. The gate agent Laura flushed with discomfort. She took Zola's phone and scanned it. The machine beeped its cheerful affirmative tone. "She's all good, Brenda. Welcome up aboard, Miss Adebayo." Brenda, however, was not satisfied. The successful scan seemed to irritate her further, as if the machine itself had conspired against her judgment. She snatched the phone from Laura's hand, ignoring Zola's sharp intake of breath. "These things can be faked," Brenda muttered, loud enough for at least 6 other people to hear. She tapped and swiped at Zola's screen, her movements aggressive. "I just need to verify the confirmation code against my manifest." Desmond, who had been observing with a thunderous expression, finally spoke. "That will be quite enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My colleague's boarding pass has been verified by your system. We are holding up the line. Kindly return her phone." Brenda's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with defiance. She saw Desmond, a man who fit her profile of a first-class passenger, standing next to Zola, a woman who did not. The cognitive dissonance fueled her spite. "Sir, I understand your concern, but airline security is my top priority," she said, her voice now a self-righteous declaration for the benefit of her growing audience. "I'm sure your associate wouldn't want to fly on a plane that wasn't secure, would she?" The deliberate emphasis on associate was a calculated insult, demoting Zola from a peer to a subordinate, an accessory. Zola held out her hand. "My phone, please." Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmurs. There was no plea in it, only a command. For a moment, Brenda seemed taken aback by the sheer force of will in those 3 words, but her prejudice was a fortress, and she doubled down. "I'll hold on to this for a moment," Brenda announced, tucking the phone into her uniform pocket. "I'm going to have to call the ticketing desk to cross-reference the payment method. It's just procedure when a ticket raises red flags." "What red flags?" Zola asked, her voice still dangerously calm. "The fact that it was paid for. Or is it the name on the ticket that you find so unbelievable?" The directness of the question made Brenda's plastic smile flicker. "Now there's no need to get defensive. I'm just doing my job. Some people try to use frequent flyer miles that aren't theirs or stolen credit cards." She trailed off, letting the accusation hang in the air. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate public humiliation. Passengers were now openly staring, some with sympathy for Zola, others with suspicion. The seed of doubt Brenda had planted was taking root. Zola could feel the weight of their collective gaze. She had spent years of her life making herself invulnerable to this kind of judgment, building a world where her intellect and her achievements spoke for themselves. Yet here in this anonymous airport corridor, she was being reduced to a stereotype by a woman whose power was confined to the fuselage of an airplane. Brenda. "That's not the procedure," Laura, the gate agent, whispered urgently. Her ticket scanned green. "Her A-advantage number is linked. We should let her board." Brenda shot Laura a venomous look. "Are you the purser on this flight, Laura, or am I? I have 30 years of experience with this airline. I know a suspicious situation when I see one." She turned her back on the gate agent, dismissing her. She faced Zola again, her expression one of finality. "You and your friend will have to step aside. We need to continue boarding the rest of our first-class passengers. I will deal with you once I've confirmed the legitimacy of this." She patted her pocket where Zola's phone was ticket. The word rest was the final twisting knife. It severed Zola and Desmond from the group, branding them as outsiders, as problems to be dealt with. Desmond, livid, began to pull out his own phone. "I'm calling corporate. I am an executive platinum concierge key member, and I have the direct line for the vice president of operations. This is the most egregious display of discriminatory behavior I have ever witnessed." Brenda's smirk faltered slightly at the mention of concierge key, the airline's secret invitation-only status. But she recovered quickly. "Sir, you are free to do that. In the meantime, you are obstructing the boarding process. Please step aside, or I will have to call airport security." It was a standoff. Zola looked at the faces in the line. She saw the impatience, the awkwardness, the desire for the scene to just be over. She saw the victory in Brenda's eyes. Brenda wanted a fight. She wanted Zola to scream, to cry, to make a scene that would justify her calling security and having her removed. Zola would not give her the satisfaction. She put a calming hand on Desmond's arm. "It's all right, Desmond." She then looked directly at Brenda. Her calm demeanor seemed to unnerve the flight attendant more than any shouting match could have. "You believe my ticket is fraudulent?" It was a statement, not a question. "I believe it warrants verification," Brenda corrected, lifting her chin. "And you will not allow me to board until you have performed this verification." "That is correct. And you are confiscating my personal property to do so." "It's part of the investigation," Brenda said, the lie now so big she was fully committed to it. Zola nodded slowly, a strange, thoughtful expression on her face. It wasn't the look of defeat Brenda had been hoping for. It was the look of a chess master who has just seen her opponent make a fatal, irreversible error. Okay, Zola said softly. I understand. Zola's quiet acceptance was not surrender. It was a strategic retreat. To Brenda, it looked like a victory. She puffed out her chest slightly, her authority now in her mind, cemented. She gestured magnanimously to the passengers behind them. My apologies for the delay, folks. Please come right ahead. The line began to move again. The other passengers shuffling past Zola and Desmond, most avoiding eye contact. A few shot Zola sympathetic glances, but no one spoke up. No one wanted to be the next target of Brenda's rigid authority. Desmond was seething beside her, his hand still gripping his phone. Zola, this is unacceptable. We are not just letting this go. I'm making the call. You're right, Zola said, her eyes following Brenda, who was now greeting the other passengers with renewed vigor, her smile back in place. We're not letting this go. But you don't need to call your contact. She turned to him. May I borrow your phone? Desmond, confused, handed it to her. Who are you calling Plan B? She said simply. She stepped away from the flow of traffic, finding a quiet corner against the windows overlooking the tarmac. She dialed a number from memory, a number she rarely used. It rang only once. Yes, Ms. Adebayo? A crisp, professional voice answered. It was David, the chief pilot of her newly acquired aviation team. David. Good morning, Zola said, her voice completely level, betraying none of the fury and humiliation simmering beneath the surface. Change of plans regarding our trip to Dubai. Is everything all right, ma'am? Everyone is fine. However, we will no longer be flying commercial. We were denied boarding. She let the phrase hang there, knowing the professional implications. There was a brief, loaded silence on the other end of the line. I see David said, his tone shifting from professional courtesy to ice-cold efficiency. And what is your current location, JFK Terminal 8, Gate 42? Our original flight was AA104. Understood. The Gulfstream is currently hangared at the signature private terminal at JFK. It was scheduled for a maintenance check this afternoon, but it's flight ready. I can have the aircraft fueled, catered, and on the tarmac in 45 minutes. Is that acceptable? More than acceptable, David. There's one more thing. I need you to file our new flight plan with a priority departure request. Of course. Standard procedure. No, Zola said, her eyes locking onto the massive Airbus A380 that was their intended ride, now almost fully boarded. I need you to file it with the highest priority. Use the emergency authorization code if you must, the one for critical medical or diplomatic transport. David paused. That code was reserved for the most extreme circumstances and would bring the full attention of JFK's air traffic control. Using it for a non-emergency could have serious repercussions. Ma'am, that's a significant request. It will essentially give us clearance over all other commercial traffic. I'm aware, David, Zola said, a chillingly calm resolve in her voice. There's a particular Boeing 77 operating as flight AA104 that I want to have a front row seat for our departure. Make it happen. Though he couldn't possibly understand the full context, David knew a non-negotiable order when he heard one. The owner of the jet. The woman who signed his very generous paycheck had been denied boarding. That was all he needed to know. Consider it done, Ms. Adebayo. A car will be waiting for you and Mr. Finch at the arrivals level door 4 in 15 minutes. Look for a black Cadillac Escalade. The driver's name is Frank. He will bring you directly to the jet. Thank you, David. She hung up and handed the phone back to a speechless Desmond. He had heard the entire conversation. The initial confusion on his face had morphed into a slow dawning realization, and finally a look of profound, almost wicked satisfaction. Plan B indeed, he murmured, a grin spreading across his face. Zola walked back towards the gate. The last passenger was just disappearing down the jet bridge. Brenda stood with Laura, looking self-satisfied. She saw Zola approaching and her expression hardened, expecting another confrontation. Zola stopped a few feet away. "We won't be needing that flight after all," she said calmly. "You can keep the boarding pass. And my phone. We'll have my legal team retrieve it from you later." Brenda's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "We've made other arrangements," Zola said. She gave the flight attendant a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You were right in a way. I don't belong on this flight. I should have known better." Without another word, she and Desmond turned and walked away, leaving a perplexed and vaguely uneasy Brenda Jenkins staring after them. As they walked, Zola could feel the anger beginning to subside, replaced by a cold, clear focus. Brenda had wanted to put her in her place. She had succeeded. Zola's place just wasn't where Brenda thought it was. It wasn't in coach or even in first class. It was in the owner's seat of a Gulfstream G700, about to teach a very public lesson in the consequences of baseless contempt. Brenda Jenkins watched them go, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her gut. Her primary feeling was one of triumph. She had faced down a perceived threat to her authority, and won. The young woman with the attitude and the suspiciously expensive ticket had been put in her place, forced to retreat with her tail between her legs. The story she would tell in the galley later would be polished to a fine sheen. She, the vigilant, experienced guardian of the skies, had sniffed out a problem and neutralized it with professionalism and firmness. She finally pulled Zola's phone from her pocket, a small trophy of her victory. The screen lit up, showing a simple, elegant wallpaper of interlocking geometric patterns. It looked expensive. She scoffed. Probably a knockoff, just like the owner. She made a mental note to turn it over to Lost, and found, after they landed in Dubai, claiming the passenger had simply left it behind after their disagreement. "Are they gone?" Laura asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Brenda, I really think you should have just let them board. That man mentioned concierge key." "Oh, please," Brenda snapped, her good mood evaporating at the hint of criticism. He was probably her sugar daddy, trying to throw his weight around. People like that get a taste of money, and they think the rules don't apply to them. Well, they do. On my aircraft, my rules apply. She glanced down the jet bridge. "Is boarding complete?" "Yes, all passengers are on board." "Good. Let's get this show on the road." Brenda swept onto the aircraft, her professional demeanor restored. She was in her element here. The cabin of the Boeing 777, configured for this ultra-long-haul flight, was her kingdom. She moved through the first-class cabin, her eyes scanning for any imperfection, a stray pillow, a smudged screen. She greeted the remaining passengers by name, her earlier confrontation seemingly forgotten, compartmentalized away as a job well done. She made her way to the forward galley, where two other flight attendants, a veteran named Karen and a younger man named Alex, were preparing for pre-departure service. "You will not believe what just happened at the gate." Brenda began launching into her embellished version of the events. She painted Zola as arrogant and evasive, Desmond as belligerent and threatening. She framed her own actions as a heroic defense of security protocol. "She was wearing a tracksuit, for heaven's sake," Brenda finished with a flourish. "Trying to board international first class. The audacity." Karen nodded along, accustomed to Brenda's dramatic retellings. Alex, however, looked uneasy. "But her ticket scanned green right, and concierge key. That's a big deal. They don't just give that to anyone. Details, details. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. You develop a gut feeling for these things after 30 years, Alex. You learn to spot people who don't belong. Trust me, I saved the airline a major headache. Soon the heavy cabin door was closed and sealed with a resounding thud. The jet bridge retracted. Brenda took her position for the safety demonstration, her movements crisp and practiced. The massive Rolls-Royce engines spooled up with a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. The aircraft, a behemoth of modern engineering, pushed back from the gate, its sheer size a statement of power. Brenda felt a familiar thrill. This was her world. She was sealed inside a multi-million-dollar machine about to soar above the earth. The petty squabbles of the terminal were behind her, below her. She had won. The 707 taxied gracefully following the glowing blue lights that guided it through the labyrinthine network of taxiways at JFK. Brenda settled into her jump seat for takeoff, her mind already on the service schedule. Champagne after takeoff, then the amuse-bouche, followed by the caviar service. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. The captain's voice came over the PA system. "Cabin crew, please be seated for departure." Through her small porthole window, Brenda could see the long line of planes waiting for their turn on runway 31L. There were planes from Lufthansa Emirates and Virgin Atlantic, a global procession waiting to take to the skies. Their 707 was third in line. The wait wouldn't be long. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It was the fleeting, delicious taste of victory, and in her mind it was absolute. She had no way of knowing that her name was at that very moment being spoken with urgency in the air traffic control tower, and that her headache wasn't avoided. It was taxiing out to meet her. Captain Matthews was a man who appreciated order. Flying a 300-ton aircraft across the planet was an exercise in precision, a symphony of checklists, procedures, and unwavering adherence to the rules. Their taxi to the runway had been smooth, and the chatter from air traffic control ATC was routine. They were now second in line for departure, holding short of runway 31L. Ahead of them, a British Airways A380 thundered into the evening sky. "American 104, heavy you're next. Line up and wait," the voice from the tower crackled in his headset. "Line up and wait, American 104, heavy," his first officer. Mike replied expertly, guiding the massive jet onto the runway's center line. The view from the cockpit was mesmerizing, a vast expanse of concrete stretching out, bordered by the green and white runway lights that seemed to converge at a distant vanishing point. This was the moment of potential, the pause before unleashing 115,000 pounds of thrust. "Everything looks good. Flap set, trim set," Mike announced, his hands hovering over the controls. Captain Matthews scanned his instruments. All green. "Ready when they are." They waited. The tower was supposed to give them their takeoff clearance within seconds, but the seconds stretched into a minute. "They're taking their time," Mike commented, a hint of impatience in his voice. Suddenly, a new communication from the tower, but it wasn't for them. The tone was different, sharper, more urgent. "Unidentified aircraft, you are on an active taxiway, without clearance. Identify yourself immediately." Matthews and Mike exchanged a puzzled look. That was highly unusual. A rogue aircraft at JFK unthinkable. Then they saw it. From a side taxiway, reserved for general and private aviation, something emerged into the fading light. It was impossibly sleek, painted a stunning graphite gray, that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its lines were sharp, aggressive, with a T-tail that stood high and proud. It moved with a predator's grace, utterly silent from their sound-proofed cockpit. "What in the world is that?" Mike breathed. Matthews, a veteran pilot and aviation enthusiast, recognized it instantly. "That's a Gulfstream. A G700 by the looks of it. Brand new. What the hell is it doing?" The private jet didn't stop. Guided by a tow vehicle, it was being pulled directly onto the intersection of the runway they were currently occupying. It was a flagrant, almost arrogant breach of all aviation protocol. The radio erupted. "Tower to Gulfstream! I repeat, you are entering an active runway without authorization. Abort, abort!" The controller's voice was now strained with panic. A new voice, calm and unhurried, came over the frequency. It was the pilot of the Gulfstream. "JFK Tower, this is November 700 Zulu. Alpha. We are repositioning on your instruction. We have a priority departure clearance authorization code, Victor Niner Delta." There was a stunned silence from the tower. Victor Niner Delta was a ghost code, a top-tier override that few controllers ever encountered in their careers. It was reserved for situations involving national security cabinet-level transport or a directive from the highest levels of the FA. Captain Matthews felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Something was very, very wrong. His multi-million-dollar airliner, filled with over 300 passengers, was being treated like an obstacle. The Gulfstream G700 was now fully on the runway, positioned perpendicular to their 777. Its tow vehicle detached and sped away. The jet sat there, its navigation lights blinking languidly, effectively, and completely blocking their path. It was like a jewel-encrusted dagger placed in the heart of the airport's operations. "American 144. Heavy hold your position." The tower finally transmitted the controller's voice, tight with controlled fury. We have a situation here." "Holding position," Mike confirmed, though it was obvious they weren't going anywhere. "What kind of situation?" "Stand by." Inside the first-class cabin, the delay was becoming noticeable. Passengers lulled into a pre-takeoff trance were starting to stir. Brenda, unbuckling herself from the jump seat against regulations, began to walk the aisle. "Just a minor traffic jam up ahead, folks," she said with a reassuring, practiced smile. "Very common here at JFK. We should be on our way in just a moment." A passenger in seat 3A, a tech executive with a keen eye for airplanes, was peering intently out his window. "That's not traffic," he said to his wife. "That's a private jet, a G700, and it's parked on our runway." Brenda followed his gaze. She saw the sleek, dark aircraft sitting arrogantly on the concrete, its powerful engines shimmering with heat haze. She felt a surge of indignation. Who did these private jet owners think they were flaunting their wealth, disrupting the lives of hundreds of regular, rule-abiding travelers? It was the same entitled attitude she'd confronted at the gate just an hour ago. The world she thought was becoming overrun with these people. She scoffed and turned away from the window, oblivious. Her world was small, confined to her airplane and her rules. She couldn't possibly imagine that the situation on the runway and the situation she had created at the gate were one and the same on a collision course timed to absolute perfection. The grand obstruction was in place. The audience was captive. The curtain was about to rise. The delay stretched from 1 minute to 5, then to 10. Captain Matthews' patience, a commodity he usually had in abundance, was wearing thin. JFK's departure queue was now a logjam of epic proportions, with a dozen heavy jets lined up behind them, all burning fuel, all running late. His radio was a cacophony of frustrated pilots demanding answers. "Tower, what is the status of the aircraft on the active?" he finally demanded, his professional tone barely concealing his anger. "When can we expect runway 31L to be cleared?" The reply from the tower was hesitant, almost bewildered. "American 104, be advised. The aircraft has priority. They are awaiting passenger arrival. We have no estimate for the runway being cleared at this time. All departures from 31L are on an indefinite hold." "Awaiting passenger arrival on the runway?" Mike exclaimed in disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" Captain Matthews rubbed his temples. He had been flying for 35 years and had never heard of such a thing. Boarding a plane from a car on an active runway at one of the world's busiest airports. It was beyond irregular. It was a power play of an unimaginable scale. Whoever was on that jet didn't just have money. They had a level of influence that could bend the entire federal aviation system to their will. As if on cue, a vehicle appeared driving down a service road that ran parallel to the runway. It was a black Cadillac Escalade, its tinted windows reflecting the airport lights. It didn't slow down. It drove directly onto the taxiway, then onto the edge of the runway, stopping precisely beside the Gulfstream G700. The air stairs of the private jet descended with a quiet hydraulic hiss, touching the tarmac, just as the Escalade's doors opened. Inside the 777, the sight was causing a commotion. Phones were out with passengers recording the bizarre spectacle. Brenda moved through the cabin, her patience now gone, replaced by a sharp-edged annoyance. "Folks, please remain in your seats. The captain will give us an update shortly." She repeated, her voice strained. She found herself back at the window of seat 3A, drawn to the drama despite herself. "Unbelievable," she muttered to the passenger. "They shut down the entire airport just so some celebrity doesn't have to walk through the terminal. The nerve." The passenger, still filming, zoomed in on the scene. "Here they come." The rear door of the Escalade opened. The first person to step out was an older gentleman in a finely tailored suit. He moved with an air of distinction, surveying the scene with a calm, almost amused expression. Brenda squinted. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. Then the second person emerged from the Escalade. It was a young woman. She was wearing a black cashmere tracksuit and white sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate braids. Even from 100 yards away, there was no mistaking her. It was the girl from the gate, Zola Adebayo. Time seemed to slow down for Brenda. Her brain struggled to process the information, to connect the two disparate scenes. The insolent young woman she had berated and dismissed at Gate 42 was now stepping out of a luxury SUV onto a blocked runway, preparing to board a $50 million private jet. The jet that was the sole reason her own plane, with its hundreds of passengers, was sitting immobilized on the tarmac. It didn't compute. It was impossible. A glitch in the matrix. Zola didn't immediately board the aircraft. Instead, she stood on the tarmac, her hands in her pockets, and slowly turned her head. Her gaze swept past the imposing tail of her Gulfstream and traveled the length of the Boeing 777. She looked directly at the flight deck. Then her eyes moved slowly, deliberately along the row of passenger windows, as if she were searching for someone. Brenda felt a physical jolt, as if Zola's eyes had locked directly onto hers through the thick plexiglass. The smug superiority she had felt just minutes ago curdled into a cold, sickening dread. The condescending words she had spoken at the gate echoed in her mind. "We've been having some issues with fraudulent upgrades. I'm sure your associate wouldn't want to fly on a plane that wasn't secure. We need to continue boarding the rest of our first-class passengers." The phone in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The full, horrifying reality of the situation crashed down upon her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some random VIP holding up the airport. This was a response. This was a consequence. This entire monumental airport-stopping spectacle was because of her. She had picked a fight with the wrong person. She hadn't just poked a bear. She had insulted a god, and that god had responded by casually stopping the world to prove a point. "Oh no," Brenda whispered, her face draining of all color. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the back of the seat for support. The passenger in 3A lowered his phone, his eyes wide. He looked from the scene on the tarmac to Brenda's ashen face. He didn't know the whole story, but he was smart enough to see the connection. "You know her?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and accusation. Brenda couldn't answer. She could only stare out the window as Zola Adebayo, after holding her gaze on the 777 for a long, pregnant moment, turned and ascended the stairs to her private jet, disappearing inside without a single backward glance. The lesson had been delivered. The fallout was about to begin. The moment the Gulfstream's door sealed shut, the atmosphere in the cockpit of American 104 shifted from frustration to crisis. The private channel on their radio reserved for company communications crackled to life. It was the airline's chief operations manager at JFK, and his voice was frantic. "Matthews, what the hell is going on over there? I've got the FAA, the Port Authority, and my own VP of flight screaming down my neck. The owner of that Gulfstream, a Ms. Zola Adebayo, has just lodged a formal complaint of the highest order against one of your cabin crew." Captain Matthews's blood ran cold. "A complaint for what?" "Discrimination, harassment, and illegal confiscation of personal property at the gate. The complaint names your purser Brenda Jenkins, specifically. Ms. Adebayo claims she was denied boarding on your flight. Apparently your purser didn't believe her first-class ticket was legitimate." The manager's voice was heavy with disbelief and rage. "Is this true?" The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in the captain's mind, forming a picture of catastrophic professional negligence. The delay, the blocked runway, the unprecedented priority departure, it was all a direct result of his own crew's actions. His aircraft and his passengers were pawns in a karmic checkmate. I wasn't aware of any incident at the gate." Matthews stammered, his mind racing. "Stand by." He keyed the intercom to the cabin. "Brenda, get to the flight deck, now." His voice was devoid of its usual warmth. It was a blade of sheer ice. In the cabin, Brenda was in a state of shock. Her mind, a maelstrom of denial and panic. The captain's summons snapped her out of it. She stumbled forward, her legs unsteady. Her usually impeccable composure shattered. As she walked up the aisle, she could feel the eyes of the passengers on her. The story was starting to ripple through the plane, whispered from seat to seat. The man in 3A was already animatedly telling his wife what he'd pieced together. Brenda entered the cockpit, closing the door behind her. The space felt claustrophobic. Captain Matthews had swiveled his chair to face her, his expression grim. Mike, the first officer, stared straight ahead, refusing to even look at her. "I just got off the line with the JFK operations manager." Captain Matthews began, his voice dangerously quiet. He tells me a passenger named Zola Adebayo was denied boarding. He tells me she filed a complaint against you. He tells me that Ms. Adebayo is the owner of the Gulfstream G700, currently blocking our path to Dubai. I need you to tell me that what I'm hearing is a complete work of fiction." Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The evidence was irrefutable, sitting a few hundred feet away, a gleaming monument to her colossal misjudgment. The ticket seemed suspicious." Brenda stammered, her voice weak. "Her appearance, I was following security protocol." "Security protocol!" Matthews roared, his control finally breaking. "Security protocol is letting the gate agent scan a valid ticket and allowing the passenger to board. It is not appointing yourself judge, jury, and executioner based on what someone is wearing. It is most certainly not stealing a passenger's phone. Do you have any idea what you've done?" He gestured furiously towards the windshield. "That is not just a private jet, Brenda. That is a $50 million consequence. Because of you, this flight is indefinitely delayed. Because of you, this airline is facing a lawsuit that will likely run into the millions. Because of you, every single one of the 300 people on this plane will miss their connections, their meetings, their family events. You didn't just insult a passenger. You have single-handedly created a logistical and public relations nightmare of epic proportions for this company." Brenda shrank back, the full weight of her actions finally crushing her. 30 years of service, of seniority, of pride, all of it incinerated in a single stupid moment of prejudice. As if on cue, the radio from the tower crackled again, this time with an official, chillingly formal directive. "American 104. Heavy be advised. You are instructed to return to the gate. I repeat, return to the gate. The owner of N700ZA has specified that her aircraft will not move until the offending crew member has been deplaned." The finality of it was absolute. They were being sent back in disgrace. Captain Matthews looked at Brenda, his face a mask of utter contempt. "You heard him. This flight is going nowhere until you are off it." The news spread through the cabin like a shockwave. The captain's voice came over the PA, terse and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unforeseen crew-related issue, we are required to return to the gate. We apologize for the significant delay and will provide more information as it becomes available." The groans of frustration from the passengers were audible. Everyone knew what crew-related issue meant. It meant the flight attendant who had been acting like a queen at the gate had caused this. Her colleagues Karen and Alex, who had heard the captain's summons, now looked at Brenda with a mixture of horror and betrayal. They took a half step away from her, a subconscious act of disassociation. Her kingdom had fallen. Her reign was over. The karma wasn't just knocking at the door. It had kicked the door off its hinges and was now dismantling the entire house. The taxi back to the gate was an excruciating crawl through a personal hell of Brenda Jenkins's own making. The Boeing 777, an aircraft she had always seen as a chariot of the skies. Her personal kingdom now felt like a hearse, slowly carrying her career to its grave. Each turn of the wheels on the tarmac was a tick of the clock on her professional life. Through the window she could see other planes that had been behind them in the queue, now being rerouted, their pilots and passengers, spared the chaos she had single-handedly unleashed. They moved with purpose toward the open sky, while her flight limped back in disgrace. Her journey up the aisle to collect her belongings was a gauntlet of silent judgment. The passengers, now fully aware of the drama's central character, stared with a mixture of anger, pity, and morbid curiosity. Whispers followed her like the rustling of dry leaves. The man in seat 3A, the one with the phone, met her gaze for a brief second. There was no triumph in his eyes, just a quiet, damning assessment. Her colleagues, Karen and Alex, had already gathered her things from the galley and placed them on a seat. Karen handed her the small rollerboard suitcase and her trench coat, her expression a careful, professional blankness that was somehow more cutting than any angry word could have been. Alex simply turned away, busying himself by checking the latch on an overhead bin, a clear, unmistakable act of disassociation. In the space of an hour, she had become a pariah. When the 707 finally docked with the gate, the thud and hiss of the jet bridge connecting felt like the closing of a cell door. An airline ground operations manager, a man named Henderson, whom Brenda had known for years, was waiting at the threshold, flanked by 2 Port Authority police officers. Their presence wasn't for arrest, but to underscore the gravity of the situation and ensure her swift, quiet removal. Henderson's face was grim. He held out his hand. "Brenda, I need your company ID." Her hands trembled as she unclipped the plastic card from her uniform. It felt like she was surrendering a piece of her soul. She had worn it for 30 years. It was who she was. "Your wings, too," he said, his voice quiet but firm. That was the final blow. She slowly unpinned the small silver emblem from her jacket. It was the symbol of her seniority, her pride. She placed the pin in his outstretched palm. It felt cold and insignificant. "Someone from HR will call you in the morning to arrange a time to clear out your locker," Henderson said, avoiding her eyes. "Go on now." Brenda stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, the scene of her earlier foolish triumph. As she walked its length, the fluorescent lights seemed to hum with a mocking intensity. At the end of the corridor, back in the terminal, she had left with such arrogance she could see a handful of passengers from the flight who had chosen to deplane their trips ruined. They watched her emerge, and she lowered her head, unable to bear their stares. She was no longer a purser, a figure of authority. She was just a woman in a uniform, walking away from the wreckage of her life. The moment Henderson spoke into his radio, "She's off the aircraft. Crew member is in the terminal." A chain reaction began. The message shot from the gate to JFK operations, from operations to the air traffic control tower. On the runway, the pilot of the Gulfstream G700 heard the words he was waiting for. "November 700 Zulu, Alpha. The obstruction has been cleared. You are cleared for immediate takeoff on runway 31L. Wind is 300 at 8 knots. Have a safe flight to Dubai. Cleared for takeoff N700 ZA." "Thank you," the pilot responded, his voice the epitome of calm. Inside the opulent cabin, Zola felt the aircraft tremble as the 2 massive Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines spooled to their full awesome power. The acceleration was breathtaking, a smooth, relentless push that pressed her back into her plush leather seat. She looked out her oversized oval window as the runway lights blurred into streaks of white and green. The lumbering 707 at the gate, a behemoth that had seemed so imposing just moments ago, shrank with impossible speed, becoming a toy, a memory. Desmond raised his glass of champagne. To turning a gross injustice into an unforgettable power play. "I must admit, Zola, even I was impressed. You've created a legend today." Zola offered a small, weary smile, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "It wasn't about power, Desmond. It was about consequences. People like Brenda count on their actions having no repercussions. They insult someone, they abuse their little bit of authority. and the victim is supposed to just absorb it. Silently. I had the means to create a consequence so loud and so clear that it couldn't be ignored. It wasn't for me. It was for every other person who has been in that position, but didn't have a G700 waiting for them. Within seconds, they were airborne, climbing steeply into the night sky over Queens. Zola looked down at the sprawling, glittering metropolis, a complex web of systems and people. She had just pulled on one of those strings and made the entire web vibrate. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. The aftermath was as swift and decisive as the Gulfstream's takeoff. The video from the passenger in 3A, uploaded with the caption, "You won't believe why our flight got turned around," #GateGate number JFK, exploded online. By the time the 707 with a new purser finally took off for Dubai, over 3 hours late, the story was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Brenda Jenkins received the call from HR the next morning. It was a brief, impersonal conversation. Her employment was terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and actions detrimental to the company's reputation and financial standing. Her pension was frozen pending a review. In a single day, her 30-year career had been erased. The airline facing a PR cataclysm and a legal team from Zola that was described as a pack of smiling great white sharks didn't even attempt a fight. They issued a groveling public apology, and their legal department worked around the clock to reach a settlement. The final number was never made public, but insiders whispered it was well into 8 figures. Zola accepted the settlement on one condition. She never saw a penny of it herself. Instead, she used it as the seed money to launch the Adebayo Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for young women of color, pursuing degrees and careers in STEM fields. The initiative's motto was simple: building a world where your talent is your only boarding pass. The story became a piece of modern folklore, a cautionary tale whispered in airline break rooms, a case study taught in university business ethics classes, a viral legend about a quiet tech genius and her spectacular runway clearing lesson in respect. Zola never spoke of it publicly. She didn't need to. Her ascent into the sky that night, leaving the chaos and prejudice grounded below, was the only statement required. It was a silent, powerful testament that true class isn't about a uniform or a title, but about dignity. And for those who try to strip others of that dignity, karma doesn't just fly first class. Sometimes it owns the plane, the pilot, and the entire runway. And that's the incredible story of how a single act of prejudice led to one of the most epic and public displays of karma imaginable. It's a powerful reminder that the person you underestimate today could be the one with the power to change your world tomorrow. The real currency in this life isn't money or status, but respect. Brenda Jenkins learned that lesson the hard way, losing a 30-year career because she couldn't see past her own biases. Zola Adebayo didn't seek revenge. She simply demanded the respect she was owed, and in doing so created an opportunity for others to rise. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time you witnessed someone being completely underestimated. Let's talk about it. Thanks for listening.